This is my farm.
Don't come out here and tell me what I need.
I need solutions that work and market options that are worth my time.
Small town support that sees the bigger picture.
A global network that empowers us. A co-op that's there for us every day.
Thank you for joining us for our Agri-Pulse Washington Week in Review. I'm Spencer Chase, joined as always by Agri-Pulse Executive Editor Phil Brasher, discussing the week that was, agriculturally speaking, in Washington, D.C. And we are once again coming to you from our respective humble abodes as we continue to socially distance ourselves from each other as well as the rest of the civilized world here in the midst of this coronavirus crisis. And that's what we're going to talk to you about here today, because a week ago, we were talking about a massive piece of legislation that Congress was working on passing and getting through the system, and eventually was signed into law by President Trump. A $2.2 trillion affair to aid in the recovery and response to the coronavirus. And now we've got some implementation updates to provide to you, as well as some lingering questions, to be frank with you, about just what the implementation of that legislation is going to look like, as well as how those funds are going to be spent and dispersed into all of America and rural America in particular for our purposes. And the first thing we want to talk to you about relates to some money coming out of the Small Business Administration, and whether or not production agriculture and agribusinesses are allowed to participate in those programs. So, Phil, I guess I'll turn it over to you and just kind of broadly ask, where do things stand right now in relation to some of these two big SBA programs that we've been following?
Yeah, there was this. These are programs obviously put into the stimulus bill to try to keep people on payrolls, get the economy sort of back up to some extent while we have these stay-at-home orders across the country, restaurants, so many businesses closed, farms dealing with all sorts of disruption. One of the programs, a giant program, $350 billion that the Small Business Administration has basically had a week to set up. There was a lot of confusion out in the countryside about whether farms would be eligible. We seem to, at the end of the week here, it seemed to getting some clarity. Yes, farms are eligible. It could be broadly beneficial. Basically, it's intended to cover 2 months of payroll costs. So basically, the way it works, if you're a small business, you figure out your average monthly payroll cost, multiply that times 2.5, and you should be able to get a loan for that. A loan that can be forgiven. It's basically a grant as long as you use 75% of it to cover your payroll during this period, during an 8-week period. So potentially pretty important to businesses across the country, including agricultural employers. There's a second program, disaster loan program, 3% interest rate, very low interest rate. But the way SBA had set it up this week, farms were excluded. A lot of pushback on that from Capitol Hill, as well as farm groups, saying there was nothing in that stimulus bill that specifically excluded ag. So SBA should be making those loans available. Those are direct loans from SBA. They should be making those available to farms. As we're talking now, Spencer, that has not been, SBA does not appear to have reversed itself yet. All I can say is these things are really moving and developing almost by the hour. Stay tuned to agripulse.com. We're trying our best to stay on top of this, talking to experts, talking to everybody involved.
Well, and it's important to note, too, that the SBA is not just hearing about this from folks on Capitol Hill or farm groups. They're hearing some questions from the lending institutions as well. They're going to be, for lack of a better term, sort of the intermediaries on some of these processes. And they're not entirely sold on things right now either, it seems like.
Well, the Paycheck Protection Program, that's the forgivable loans. Those, which are essentially grants as long as you use it for payroll costs, those are supposed to go through banks and farm credit system institutions. So the banks have to handle the applications. They have to handle the whole thing. And they pushed back some. They've had some concerns. Some of the rules they didn't know. We just had a major interim final rule with some changes in the requirements that came out late yesterday. So banks are just trying to figure this out. There have been reported some difficulties getting into the SBA system. Today, Friday, was the first day of application. And again, only 1 week after this $2 trillion bill was signed into law. So I think we ought to give a little bit of slack to SBA in terms of some of the confusion here, getting delay in getting this getting the rules out and getting this up and running. But yeah, banks are asking a lot of questions. There were some changes made in what came out yesterday, I think, to try to address some of the concerns that the banks had.
Yeah, and it bears repeating what you just said there. This is a $2.2 trillion piece of legislation, and they've got a couple of the provisions implemented, one could argue not entirely implemented, but implemented to some extent within a week.
Expect a few hiccups, yeah.
Yeah. But one of the other things that we're following right now in terms of implementation of this bill focuses over at the Department of Agriculture. As if you may remember from a previous iteration of this program, as well as some of our coverage on Agri-Pulse.com, sort of the big ticket items over to USDA were sort of twofold. One was a $14 billion replenishment of the Commodity Credit Corporation, and another was a $9.5 billion fund that Congress said needed to assist producers that are feeling the brunt of the coronavirus impacts. Congress specifically mentioned livestock producers and the specialty crop community. But Phil, we're still following and trying to figure out what that's going to mean for the department in terms of how they plan to implement and who's going to get this their piece of the pie out of this $9.5 billion.
Yeah, I mean, it's specifically cordoned off for certain sectors, but these are pretty big sectors. Livestock, which would include beef, as well as dairy. Dairy specifically mentioned in the law. Specialty crops, fruits, vegetables, and also local agriculture, local food systems, farmers who sell into farmers markets and so forth. They're specifically mentioned in this law. Everybody has to fit within their just $9.5 billion, and as it has been pointed out by economists, if you try to make cattle producers whole for the 25% drop in live cattle prices back since January, you would use the whole $9.5 billion. Well, dairy producers have seen a big drop. Fruit and vegetable sector has had some incredible disruption that's going on. One of their big concerns is a lot of the fresh produce, it was destined for restaurants, food service, schools, universities, all shut down almost immediately. All that produce had to go somewhere. A lot of it, they just want to be compensated. The growers and the shippers want to be compensated for produce that can't be sold. And so that's we're talking billions of dollars there. So USDA has got to sort its way through that and figure out some way to divvy up that $9.5 billion, which sounds like a lot, but there's a lot of requests for it.
Yeah. Well, and I was on the phone with somebody earlier this week and just trying to get an idea if they were picking up anything from the department. And this person said, frankly, if you write a story on that, I'm going to be the first person to read it. A lot of folks wondering, where this money is going, and there's a lot for a lot of people. This is incredibly important where this on the ground assistance is going to head, because I don't need to tell this to anyone in farm country. Times were already tough, and this pandemic certainly has not made them any easier.
Yeah, and it's an old cliche, but we are really, really in uncharted territory. I've been covering this industry for 20 years, and we've never seen anything close to this. The amount of money, just the crisis that's going on in the supply chain, the food sector, from farm to to store, and just so many issues that have come up. It's just been unbelievable. And then you've got the government trying to get this money out, trying to keep people working, try to deal with this disruption, try to keep farms in business, and so forth and so on. It's just unbelievable amount that's going on, and to keep track of.
Mm-hmm. So obviously, coronavirus remains probably the issue that for us, for you, and for pretty much every media outlet out there, we're trying to keep an eye on all the various things that are going on with that and what that's going to mean for farm country and for production agriculture and really the American food system as a whole. That we've got plenty to keep ourselves busy with on that front. But before we let you go, we do want to mention just another story that we had on agripulse.com here this week. Kind of dovetailing off of some research that we conducted in partnership with Aimpoint. And if you haven't yet, I'd encourage you to look at a video that we posted earlier this week, a conversation between myself, Agri-Pulse publisher Sarah Wyant, as well as Aimpoint CEO Brett Scotto, just kind of about the mechanics of that research, sort of a nuts and bolts conversation of how that project worked and some of the high-level findings of it. But I want to discuss right now with you, Phil, something that you wrote earlier this week regarding the view that some producers have of the climate change / sustainability debate, as well as kind of some shifting or some interesting thoughts in regards to how they see the potential for carbon markets out there.
Yeah, this is our poll that we do periodically of farmers and ranchers, try to see where they're feeling about political issues, about the farm economy, whatever is particularly important. This was obviously done before the COVID-19 crisis really hit back in February into, I believe, March 13th. We were in the field with the interviews. This time we got to ask about some attitudes towards sustainability issues and climate change. A couple of headline results we got. One is that there was a fair amount of interest in participating among farmers and participating in carbon markets for the purpose of getting paid to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Almost half, 46% of the farmers we surveyed said they would be interested in participating in carbon markets. We also asked about climate change and how they've been affected, how much they expect to be, producers expect to be impacted by climate change. One of the interesting things that caught my eye, it was the older farmers who were more likely to say that their operations had been affected by change in growing conditions and climate. They were more likely to say that than the younger farmers. And the other thing that was notable, that farmers across the board didn't think that they would probably have to change their cropping practices or their mix of crops. Not terribly surprising because given the technology advances, the advances that seed companies have been able to make in traits, probably an expectation that they can still grow corn and soybeans or whatever the mix of crops that they're doing now, that the seed companies will be able to keep up with that in terms of drought tolerance and the other traits that you'll need if you're getting more moisture or less. So, yeah, very interesting. Check it out again at agripulse.com.
Mm-hmm. So, and it's one of those things that would be fascinating to compare sort of these numbers with the same question being asked 5, 10, 15 years ago. Obviously, we don't have that information, but we do have it. We have it now, and it'll be interesting to follow this question because this is an ongoing long-term project between Agri-Pulse and Aimpoint in terms of things that we've been doing for a while. And I imagine this question or an extremely similar form of it will probably be brought up in future surveys. And it'll be fascinating to track kind of the shift of opinions and just how farmers are viewing this going forward. So as Phil mentioned, we have a story on that on agripulse.com. There's the video that I mentioned earlier, as well as some other coverage that Phil had done for us last week with kind of the farmers' opinions on the president, the secretary, as well as some of the Democratic presidential candidates and some of the broader election-related information from that survey info. So would encourage you to kind of play around on agripulse.com for a little while and see what you could learn about what our poll of farmers and ranchers is showing about the kind of the pulse of farm country at the moment. But obviously, a lot of things going on right now, a lot of different things for us at Agri-Pulse to cover. Appreciate all of you stopping by to follow along, and would encourage you to keep doing so, because this situation is not slowing down, and neither are we. But I think that's going to do it for this week. So for Phil Brasher, I'm Spencer Chase. Have a good one.